What's going on, guys? My name is Tim Ruswick, and today we're talking about advice. I get asked for advice a lot. It's kind of weird for me, to be honest. I'm just a dude that started making videos on YouTube, and now people ask my advice. So I wanted to make a video that ironically kind of is backwards about all advice. And I know a lot of people, they look to channels like mine to figure out how they should move forward in life, or what they should do, or what kind of game to make, or like the little decisions, the specific decisions, like what kind of game to make, to should I quit my job to go indie. Like, they look for information not just on my channel, but like on Google, on YouTube, and they try and solve their very specific real world problems with the experience and general advice from others. Now, that can be good, right? Like you can save yourself a lot of time by absorbing other people's mistakes and not having to go through the mistakes. But at the same time, if I give out advice, I'm giving out that advice based on my life history and the mistakes that I've done wrong. And it may not be the right advice for you. So if you've, messaged me on Discord, or emailed me, or tweeted me for advice, which it still blows my mind that this is happening so frequently now, I've told you I don't give out advice, because I think all advice is bad advice. I think anything that I could say to you could not possibly take into context your life history, your family situation, your financial situation, how many pets you have, how difficult, you know what I mean? Like, it's insane. It's in the amount of stuff that I would have to actually take into account to give you proper advice, assuming it still may be wrong, right? Like, and it still may be wrong after all of that. So all advice is bad advice. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't learn from people, right? It just needs, you need to think for yourself. So one of the things that I did early on, like when I would read books, right? I read a ton of business books. I read a ton of marketing books. That's how I learned to market my software, because I had a piece of software that helped game developers get their assets, like their 3D models and their guns and stuff, into this engine called FPS Creator. And I sold it online, and I did really well. Not at first. It took a lot of work to get to that point, but I did really well after I learned marketing. But the way that I learned marketing was by reading a series of books. And I realized that there are things in those books that all the other books also had in them. There are snippets and little pieces of information that all the books had in common. And those were usually the things that were really important. All the individual little trails and pieces in the books, sometimes they were useful, sometimes they weren't. Sometimes I literally didn't even understand what they were trying to say. I thought I did, but it's like different every time I read it. Like Think and Grow Rich, a book by Napoleon Hill. It's a great book. I love that book. He gives a lot of great advice. He gives a lot of really weird advice about accepting things from the force of the universe and letting them come into your head. And it's okay. It's the same thing with the War of Art. Like, the whole third section of that book is kind of like, what? But every time I reread those books, I get something new from it. Like, and it's the same book. The books haven't changed, but I just see something different, right? Like, I see something that maybe I didn't see before. Maybe my life experience hadn't been experienced enough to get me to the point where I can understand what was being said in that book. Or maybe the understanding of what I'm reading is completely up to me and my experiences, and me having different experiences and more experiences in life leads me to come to a different conclusion from what I'm reading. It is what it is. And I think the third thing too that is important to note about advice is a lot of people seek out successful people for advice. They seek out the Steve Jobs of the world, the Indie Game the movie. It talks about Edmund and Jonathan Blow, and all those guys that have been successful. And they give out advice, right? They say, you should do this, you should do that. And everybody listens because they've been successful. But a lot of times, listening to the dude that failed, listening to the dude that blew his entire life savings on an indie game that didn't work, wasn't fun, and went homeless, his advice can be just as valuable if you think about it. It literally can save you the same amount of time. It can change the direction of your game. It can change a lot of things that you can do. So why do we look to some of the crazy successful people that technically could have been successful by a series of random coincidences, right? Like, this guy met this guy, and then he knew a person that connected it with somebody that blew it up at perfect time in the market, perfect time in the indie space. Plus, he met this guy that made a movie, and then, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of it can be coincidence. A lot of it can be timing. A lot of it can be personal connections. Not some mystical, magical force that comes out of their brain to give you the advice that you need. So I don't give out advice. I don't give out advice. The things that I say on this channel, you notice I always preface them with saying, in my experience, I've done this. This is what I did wrong. Occasionally I'll slip up and say, you should. But I've been trying to stop that because there's so many factors that I'm not taking into account when I say these things, when I try and use my experience to help people watching my videos. So I want you guys to think twice before you take advice from someone. I want you to think twice before you ask advice from someone. And maybe ask about their experience instead. Maybe say, hey, in your experience, do you think this works? Hey, in your experience, whatever. My college video is like the #1 video where it's like I get people literally asking me, should I drop out of school? Like, in what universe am I qualified to answer that, right? If I had to go back in time, would I drop out of school? Hell yeah. If I had to go back in time, would I drop everything to do with college 100% and never go? Absolutely. Would I like completely change that 3.5 years of my life? Fuck yeah, I would. But you know what? Like, I can't say that's the right thing for you, and I don't want to be responsible if you drop out of school and you can't make it. You know what I mean? So like, it's only you can determine your future. Only you can determine some of the things that are going to affect your future. And taking advice from people that have completely different worldviews, completely different experiences in life, completely different upbringings, completely different like goals and objectives, to give you advice. Like, not everybody's trying to help you out when they give you advice, subconsciously or consciously. You got to be careful. And I think I would look more into people's experiences, some of the mistakes that they made, some of the things that they did wrong, and how that applies to your life. I think it's a different perspective than asking someone for advice. The only people in my life that I've ever asked advice from, not my parents, although maybe when I was a kid, before I realized nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. Not my parents, not my siblings, not my girlfriend. It's been people that have known me for years. They've been in the same industry that I have. They know my mental state. They know my ups and downs. They know me really, 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 really well. And they also know the things that I'm asking advice about. I have a really good friend who's into sales and branding. He's a really good salesman. He's really deep into branding. I ask his advice a lot on how to sell something or how to brand something, because I know that he's going to give me advice that will work for me, and I know that he knows his subject matter, right? It doesn't mean that, all other advice is not applicable. It doesn't mean that all YouTube videos are not applicable. It doesn't mean that books on branding aren't applicable. But it's just a different way of kind of thinking about it, right? And no one can give you the perfect advice, and it sucks because we all want. I used to say this. I used to say, I just want somebody to tell me what to do, and I would do it. That's all I want. I just want someone to tell me, Tim, do this, and I would do it. And then I would be successful and it would all be good. But that person doesn't exist, man. That person's got to be you. And seeking advice constantly from other people that may or may not, you know, have any clue into the future or into your life or into anything, it doesn't mean anything. And taking advice on YouTube videos, you should take with a grain of salt too. Even mine. You know, the stuff that I talk about may not apply to your life, and that's okay. That's okay. But the more you absorb from the world, the more you can kind of formulate who you are and what you want to do, and take the stuff that matters most to you. So that's my message for today. If you've got any comments on this, please leave them below. I'd love to hear from you guys, as always. Once again, I'm Tim Roswick, and I will see you tomorrow.